Welcome to Milk Market Tidbit for the April Dairy Products Report that USDA released yesterday afternoon. This is Dr. Lawrence Jones, and I'm recording this on Friday morning, June the 6th. Okay, the Dairy Products Report kind of brings everything together because we get the milk production report usually first, sometimes the same day as the cold storage report, but usually the cold storage report is a couple days later, and then we follow up usually at the beginning of the next month with the dairy products. So this is how everything came together for the month of April. So just as a review, the way you read this, here are the March data. If the revisions were down, it's in red. If the revisions were up, it's in green. So you can kind of look through there and say, yeah, we increased cold storage, we increased cheese production, we decreased butter cold storage, we increased butter production. And then I've got the typical numbers and StoneX's numbers. And so these are kind of the same thing. If the estimate was low, it's in red. If it was high, it was in green. So just a couple things I want to point out on this slide. Again, you can take time to study it if you want. But number one, we need to remind ourselves that back in April, we were looking at $1.74 cheese. So that had a significant carry out 4 months that we were looking at about 14 cents to $1.88. And again, there was a significant carry in the export market. So what this says is that cheese should have been produced quite heavily at that $1.74. We would have wanted to put it in cold storage, which we did. We added 10 million to cold storage, and we would have wanted to export as much as we can. The other is the percentage of milk that goes into cheese. And this was very high at 63.4%. We would have said normally we're about 61.6. A year ago we were 6.25 or 62.5. So that was a very high percentage of the milk actually going into cheese. Look at exports real quick. Numbers I like to look at is what is the percent of the production we actually exported. And it was very similar to March, 8.86%. So yes, we increased production, but we increased exports along with that. And the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is if we don't have those exports, we would have had an extra 24 million pounds of cheese floating around the system. So we've got to make sure we do everything to protect those exports. The other number is the percent of the butter that get exported. Now, normally this is pretty low, but last month it was 5.88. This month it was a little bit lower at 5.0. So we export about 10.5 million pounds of butter and about 109 million pounds of cheese. All right, let's look at the graphs that we got. First off, daily cheese production, that's been on a tremendous upward trend from 2016. And in fact, we've kind of continued this trend just a little bit lower, but it looks very similar. But again, when you stand back and look at this, the number that kind of bothers me a little bit is the cheese production for April is the highest that we've ever had. We've never produced this amount of cheese before. And normally I hold back all of the interpretation of all of this for my Sunday podcast. That's where I go into a bit more of the philosophy, but I really, really like this graph, which is my rolling demand versus rolling disappearance. The average is very slow to respond, but you can kind of see where disappearance and demand are actually starting to come together here. You say, well, how were we disappearing more cheese than we made? Well, we were pulling it out of cold storage. I mean, that's how that blue line gets above the black line. And then whenever it's the other way, we're adding to cold storage. So again, we were pulling out of cold storage. But if we look at our rolling demand, it's about 39,200,000. Our April production was basically 41 million. So we're producing almost 2 million pounds of cheese than we actually had disappeared during the last 12 months. And right now we've got about 36 days of excess storage. If we look at American cheese, which, a big percentage of this is cheddar, but again, we were very much on an upward trend. And if we look at the production, it was just a little bit higher 2023 May. But again, this is very much a high level of American cheese production. Cheddar cheese is about the same thing. Again, been on a very upward trend. We're significantly up year over year, and that's why I don't like year over year numbers, because being up year over year is more a reflection of a year ago being an outlier down. And this is a very high level of cheddar. There's a few times we've been higher, particularly 2 years ago. But again, this is a very high level of cheddar cheese. Italian type cheese is kind of the same sort of thing, but we're almost back to this trend line where we are now. We dropped in 23, but we've slowly coming back to the original trend line. And this is the highest amount of Italian cheeses that we've ever made. Whey production had been on a downward trend and has kind of accelerated that. And it was a little bit lower than we thought. And so not quite sure if that is a result of whey going, for animal feed as opposed to drying, or why dry whey has been down where it is right now. A big part of this dry whey goes to either China for their pig population or into the sports drinks with added whey protein for kind of the new sports craze here. Butter production very seasonal, and we were on this somewhat of an upward trend, and we really blasted through that. We were a little higher back here during the pandemic, but again, this is a very high level of butter. And you can see here it outpaces 1, 2, 3 years ago by quite a bit. And this is pretty much a result of higher fat percentages, and that fat's got to go somewhere. Now, cheese is the highest use of fat, but the majority of the remainder is going to butter. Ice cream has been kind of declining, but it's leveling out here, and it was up significantly from where we kind of thought it was. It's kind of trying to reclaim here a little bit, but this has very much been on a downward trend. Yogurt, I thought it was a persona non grata back here, and said, basically the millennials and Gen X's weren't interested in yogurt because it had too much sugar. They figured out how to get the sugar out of it, and this thing has just kind of gone up, and it came in significantly higher than we thought it would on a seasonal level. And the one that I really like is cottage cheese. Again, I'm going to have a kind of a bowl of cottage cheese every morning before I go out to do the horse chores, but this has just been headed up. It was down a little bit from the seasonal level, but again, this is very much a increased production thanks to TikTok promoting it. So this last week, we had the global dairy trade, which is down a little bit. We had a milk market tidbit for the classic components. Here is the tidbit for dairy products and exports. We did have the dairy slaughter yesterday, and boy, that was under 50,000 again. So we're going to end up adding, I think, a significant number of cows in this milk production report. So next week is going to be kind of quiet, but our next milk market tidbit will probably be for the statistical uniform prices that come out from the 12th to the 14th.